if the thing draining the life from you isn't a creature of the night, but something far more sinister, lurking in plain sight? Can you feel it? Slowly feeding on your soul, your time, your very essence. Just like a vampire, it leaves you empty, but you keep inviting it in. How do you defeat something that's already inside you?
All right, welcome everybody to the inaugural spooky Halloween special edition of Porn Free Millennial podcast. My name is Mac, I'm your host, and today we're diving into a chilling comparison between two sinister forces, pornography and vampirism. As we approach Halloween, it's the perfect time to explore both of these dark entities, share striking similarities in how they prey on the vulnerable, seduce their victims, and leave behind a trail of emptiness. To guide us through this eerie exploration, I'm joined by two fantastic guests, both experts in literature and the haunting metaphors of vampirism. Together, we're going to dissect porn, much like a vampire, how it feeds off our energy, our time, and our very souls, leaving us drained and hollow. We're also going to discuss how porn has become a modern-day vampire, lurking in the shadows of the digital world, waiting for an invitation into our lives. But more importantly, we're going to talk about how we can shine the light on it and defeat this ever-lurking shadow. Before we jump in, let me introduce my guests. So first up, we have returning two-time guest, Dr. Gregory Borse, who is an English and philosophy professor. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me again. I really have enjoyed it and am looking forward to tonight's topic.
Right on. Well, really appreciate you being here. Again, third-time guest. And with us today, first-time guest, Kale Zelden, who was actually introduced to me through Dr. Gregory Borse. They both went to LSU together, and Kale, like Dr. Borse, is also a teacher of English in high school. Kale, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm great. It's great to be here, Mac. It's fun. I've interacted with you from time to time on Twitter, and it's great to sort of get to interact with you in person. It's good stuff. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think we're gonna get a little bit spooky today, talking about this. Vampires for me, it's always been interesting. I feel like they always kind of draw you in these vampire movies,
Yeah.
right? And they kind of stick with you. And
Yeah.
I was thinking about doing something a little bit new for the podcast, and I was thinking it would be fun to do like a Halloween special. And then when I started to think about the Halloween special, I started to think, well, what kind of like Halloween creature, like spooky creature, does porn remind me of? And I think the vampire really stuck out to me of this entity, that feeds off of the life force of us. So to set the scene a little bit of a backstory, vampirism in literature, it traditionally represents a creature that feeds off human life force, a creature that thrives in the shadows and can live forever unless it's confronted. Sound familiar to
Yeah.
my listeners? Much like vampires, pornography, I think, feeds off the attention and energy of its viewers. It lingers in the dark corners of the internet, our minds preying on our deepest vulnerabilities. So just to start off with, I would just toss it to both of you. Like, how do you see the parallels between the ancient vampire myth and the modern day like seduction, so to speak, of pornography?
Go, Greg.
Oh, me first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, one, I think that the vampire myth is peculiarly modern.
Yeah.
I think it's born out of the scientific revolution. Obviously, we get the twin writings of the Dracula story, and then Mary Shelley's Unbinding Prometheus, or the modern Prometheus.
Modern Prometheus, yeah.
In Frankenstein. But I think that the vampire is especially a good parallel to pornography because it feeds on human beings' innate desires and their fears at the same time. The desire, of course, is for everlasting life, and the fear is the fear of death, which is the gateway to actual everlasting life. So, sort of a twin-edged sword that the vampire figure takes advantage of. The other thing that I really want to talk about and introduce, I just want to introduce it now, but I really want to dive into it, is that the vampire as a villain or as a monster or whatever you want to call it, as a force, also capitalizes on human beings' innate exercise of their own free will. And so what the vampire does is he seduces the individual into participating in their own destruction, while holding out these promises that he cannot possibly give to them. But the promise is held out, and it's what seduces the individual to participate. That's why it was important, Mac, when you introduced the whole topic, you said invited. Has to be invited, and you have to say yes. And the best treatments of the vampire myth have always capitalized on that important part of the bargain that's being made.
Right, because it's always a seduction, right, Greg? It's that it requires an assent of the will of the mark, for it to do its thing. And I'm struck by the comparison. I think it's apt. I mean, as soon as you pitched it to us, Mac, I was like, yeah, of course, that makes total sense. It's interesting to look at the sort of the history of sort of the vampire, and Greg's right. It really is a modern phenomenon. Like, the monsters in this kind of register are modern, and I think that's worth thinking of. The sort of you see these things. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, of course, was written in 1818, and that is right as the Industrial Revolution, the practical scientific revolution is really remaking England. You look at the art. There's a lot of that Turner stuff it's all about sort of this power that is being unleashed and wrecking things. And so you have this sense that we're not exactly sure where we fit in this thing that has become bigger than ourselves. And so there's that sense that, and there's a sense of helplessness, which I think, Greg, you were kind of picking up. Like, you feel, it actually, interestingly enough, it's almost like it gets you to forfeit your agency. It makes you feel helpless, makes you feel like you have no say in this thing, which is part of the spell, right? Which is part of the nasty magic. So, but I also think worthy, this is sort of a, you think of this as a 19th century thing. I think it's important to bring up something like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, sort of in the midst of this sort of this daytime, purity, versus this kind of nighttime monstrosity. And so I think that there's an interesting back and forth between the day and the night. The sort of, as you said, the things that lurk in the shadows. Well, there's so it really does seem to creep in those shadows, and I think that's an important thing. But I'd also like to point out that the overt eroticism of the Dracula myth is really a later it's implicit. It's there. Even in like I'm thinking of Keats' poems, Greg. Where it's like there's that sense of the succubus type figure, but specifically the vampires become more hypersexualized the deeper into the myth we've gone. And so you look at those, Greg, I remember you and I rewatched The Hunger when we were in graduate school.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I wanted to talk about that too. I mean, it's a fantastic film, but it has it almost makes you sympathize with the vampire.
Correct, right? And then, of course, I'm not sure if somebody like, popular novelist Anne Rice, I'm not so sure, Anne Rice must have been doing her stuff right at around the same time. So it's kind of an interesting kind of moment. Something's going on there, and then, of course, Bram Stoker's Dracula. What is that? Is that a Coppola movie? No, it's Coppola, right?
Yes, I think he did. Well, it's been done so many times, but I think.
But I'm thinking of Bram Stoker's Dracula, the one with
you're right.
I think
with
Gary Oldman.
I think Gary Oldman and Winona Ryder.
Keanu Reeves.
That's right. It's what a
his
very
accent
early
did not change the whole
Yes,
time.
I know. I remember joking about that when it came. But that one sort of is explicitly erotica. I mean, it really is. The whole thing sort of works on that. And so anyway, I think that you have all these things, and then the last little thing I want to throw this at you, Cam, because I want to know what you think of it, because somebody said something about this in a different context, but it stuck in my head. And then when you brought up the topic, I thought it was worth doing it. But there's a strange kind of mocking liturgical character to the myth, but especially to pornography. Especially when I'm thinking about, when it's used, how it's used, what it's used for. There's a kind of a ritual that goes on around it that, in rituals, of course, prep you for properly understood, a high-minded liturgy prepares you for worship, but this kind of like anti-liturgy, this kind of anti-ritual, primes you for depletion, right? As quite physically. So
And was that for me, or is that for Dr.
Yeah,
Paul?
throw it out to you. Like, in other words, like, there's something about, if you read these vampire myths and you see them play out, there's a kind of almost like a script that
Mhm.
that the vampire follows in order to sort of bring about the seduction. And I wonder if there was a sort of a comp, when we think of pornography, there's
Oh,
this
totally.
this almost pre cognitive script that you kind of sort of trance like kind of go into, and you see that kind of the trance of the mark in these vampire movies, these vampire stories, where they kind of
Yes.
lose almost like a kind of a drug haze, but it's not. I mean, we know that it's not drugs. So anyway.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. So it's so interesting you brought that up, because my last podcast I had on my coach and mentor, who's a
Mhm.
pastor, Vern
Mhm.
Tomke, Finding Traction podcast. And it's kind of funny. I should have just used the word like vampiric trance, because that could have
Yeah.
led into this episode. But
Yeah.
instead I talked like it was like a zombie. I was like a zombie. So
Well, I want to
basically,
talk about zombies later on, because I think, I was thinking about
yeah.
zombies today too. Yeah, anyway, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
But yeah, so basically, yes, there is like a ritual that goes into it, like using porn compulsively. There is like a ritual that starts to play out, and it's actually something that we talk about a lot. Like, I'm in a group, which I'm
Yeah.
actually going to after this podcast. I think it was like actually a few sessions ago. We
Mhm.
talked about that there's like a ritual that you will start to do once you start going into the cycle. You get like preoccupied
Interesting.
with something, then you
Mhm.
start to do like ritualistic behavior.
Mhm.
It could be like, when you're going to bed at night, like
Right. Right.
like where your devices are,
Yeah.
just like things that you have, kind of like the Pavlov's dog, like
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
like conditioned, so to speak,
Yeah.
when that one temptation hits you,
Mhm.
that you're just weak to.
Mhm.
And typically, at least for me and people listening, it's that seduction. It's
Yeah.
that sexual aspect of things, like an
Mhm.
image, or it could be a video, or it could just be how we're feeling inside, which I think that's what the vampire more or less
Is
kind of
preying on.
is
Yeah.
preying on, is
Yeah.
what your weaknesses are. But like you said, once that ritual starts, it's kind of like when you're watching the movies or you're reading the literature, whoever that mark is, it's almost like they're in a trance when you're
Yeah.
watching them, and you're like, oh my gosh, like don't open the door, don't
Yeah.
open the door. And that's exactly how it is with pornography. When you're in this trance, you start to maybe edge, which is a term for like you're basically kind of edging towards pornography. You
I
might
see.
be looking at images too long. You might type in the name of somebody but then delete it, stuff
That's
like that,
funny.
right? Yeah, like it's so crazy, but it
And
is like this.
is this a recursive? Is it recursive? Like, is it like this pattern sort of repeats itself?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so I'll bring up, like, so what we normally do when we check in how we're doing with recovery.
Mhm.
Normally there's a check-in I do every day with my brother, where we're going through how we're feeling, what
Mhm.
kind of activities we're doing in recovery, where our sobriety is at, what
Mhm.
kind of threats there are to that sobriety, and then what tools we're using. And part of when we check in where our sobriety is at, we're normally saying, "Hey, green light, I'm good." Yellow, that's where the trance starts, is the
Right.
yellow, is when you start
Right.
to do these behaviors, these activities that are almost kind of preconditioned that you're trying to break out of. So
Mhm.
for example, I think it was like a month or two ago, I had like 2 yellow days where
Mhm.
I felt like I was kind of getting into a trance. It was because I was really tired. I think I was going through some aspects of my divorce to finalize it that were weighing on me. So
Okay.
it's kind of like almost like I was getting broken down to a very vulnerable place, to where the vampire can start to sing its song
Yeah.
to bring me in.
Mhm.
But the more and more you practice recovery, the more and more you talk about it, you work on it, you start to see the vampire for what the vampire is.
Mhm.
You start to put garlic at your door. You start to do things like
Yeah.
have holy water ready. You have Van Helsing on speed dial, basically.
Yeah.
To say, hey man, like I need, like my little brother's like my Van Helsing. Like if I need help with something, I'll reach out to him, and then we slay the vampire together. So yeah, what you talked about, I love that, because I think that is a huge part. Is the vampire's got these powers, right? Whatever it is, satanic or whatever kind of power it's drawing from, that evil power, and it can just pull in humans that are not mentally, I think, ready to have that battle, that are more
Yeah.
looking maybe at the outside of the vampire and how beautiful or handsome this vampire is. But like a character like Van Helsing, right? It sees the vampire for what it is, and he wants to kill the vampire because he knows what the vampire is going to be. It's going to be feeding off the whole community if he doesn't stop it.
Yeah, and the Van Helsing character is so interesting because he suffers no fools, right? In terms of like he knows exactly what this is, and I think what's so frustrating for a Van Helsing is that when you're trying to deal with the person who's under the trance, so to speak, it's that the one you're trying to help is not helping themselves, ward it off. And the reason why I bring up liturgies, and again, it's so interesting to me that this vampire thing is, it's gothic, and it's sort of, in my world, it's kind of Catholic adjacent. It's sort of, crosses and blood and rituals and all those sorts of things, and it even has the sort of the sort of the artistic idiom of goth, right, and all that kind of stuff. I'm not surprised by that because, in my experience, most of us, good old fashioned Americans sort of believe in this kind of default neutrality, and I think that's bogus. I don't think that there's really such a thing as a neutral space, and as I've gotten older, I've become disenamored with that myth of kind of I'm fine. Charles Taylor, the Canadian philosopher, in his book The Secular Age, talks about the sort of the old kind of more medieval sense that human beings were porous, that we were able to be penetrated and affected and influenced overtly by spirits, and then the myth that took it over, he calls the buffered self, that we believe that we are sort of our own entity unto ourself, and that we're buffered, right, by some sort of like layer around us. And I think that Dracula, the vampire, frankly, is a sort of poking holes in the myth. And I'm talking about myth as sort of a way of understanding the world. It really destroys the myth of the buffered self. And it's interesting to me, Greg, I don't know what you think about this, but it's interesting to me that the myth of the vampire emerges just as we sort of internalize this sort of this grand liberal myth of the buffered self.
Well, and it coincides with the discarding of the Christian myth as the central one for Western civilization.
Right.
And it seems that the vampire rises to reassert the idea, because the idea of the demon never goes away.
Right.
So if the succubus is an early artistic and literary and mythic version of that, that precedes it, I can't help but think of The Exorcist. And you guys talking about Van Helsing, Father Marin in The Exorcist is the Van Helsing.
He's Van Helsing character. That's right.
Sure.
There is only one. He sees through everything. And in fact, it took me a while to realize this. And it's interesting, the parallels between demonic possession, pornography, and the vampire myth.
Right.
Because
and I'm going to add a tech myth to this in a minute, but go ahead.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We're definitely moving that direction. But what I would say is that it took me a while to realize, because I never could understand demonic possession as it is presented in that based on a factual story film called The Exorcist, which is still unsurpassed.
Right.
And then I realized that the target of the demon was not Reagan. It was Marin.
Yeah.
It was Marin all along. And I was like, okay, now that makes total sense to me. But the hallmarks of the vampire as a personification of evil are all still there with the demon. Have to be invited in. You have to participate in some way. in allowing that possession to begin and to take over. You have to assent. And Mac, I wanted to ask you before I go back to another point that I wanted to make about the periods in which these monsters appear. Mac, you were talking about that ritualistic behavior. And it sounds to me like when you're in recovery, you're not merely breaking patterns, but you're also replacing those patterns with other healthier patterns. Like
right. Yeah.
This liturgy analogy is really, really good.
Yeah.
Because what the one does is it replaces healthy liturgies with anti-liturgies, which become. Yeah, go ahead, Cal.
Yeah, I was just saying because what I finally have realized is that liturgies are not optional, right?
Right.
Liturgies are not optional, and I really used to want to hold on to this idea of kind of this sort of neutral space, right, in which I'm neither for or against. I'm aliturgical, right? And thank you very much. I'll have my liturgy, on Sunday morning, and I'm all good. But what I have realized is that all of life is some kind of cosmic liturgy. And so you're either, you're either sort of casting the liturgy spell, for, the good and against the bad, or for the bad against the good. Like I no longer think that you can avoid it.
I absolutely agree. And I would add this. Notice when it is that the dead rise from the grave and the ghosts appear on stage. It's always in the interregnum.
Yeah.
That's when the elder Hamlet shows up.
That's right.
When there is a crisis, and look at what Shakespeare's anticipating in Hamlet. He's anticipating the actual consequences of the age of reason and the Enlightenment and the age of science. He's right on the cusp of it, and it's as if he's haunted not merely by the past but by the future as well.
Right. He's haunted by the very thought. I mean, the very thought that there could even be such a thing as the spirit world, right?
Right.
This is exactly what's going on there. And, so as we sort of go deeper and deeper and deeper into sort of this myth of, this materialist myth, that is precisely when the sort of the bad, the bad guys get their, they can do their best work, like in the dark, right? You say, because if there's no light shining on the spirits, then of course he's wide open.
And Mac, for your listeners, I use that term interregnum. It simply means the time in between kings, which is seriously one of the most dangerous times for a society and for human beings. Right. That's why presidential elections are so fraught.
I see what
you're saying. Days that you see, because we are approaching a time between kings. We are transitioning one power from one, administration, if you will, but from one to another. And interregnums tend to be where the paradigm shifts happen in reality. And so definitely.
That just unlocked a thought in my head.
Yeah. So that's why the monsters appear right always in those ages. They don't appear when everybody's fat and happy and everything's going well. Right. They appear when things are beginning to collapse. People have forgotten about their foundations. The model for reality is no longer asking the right questions. And by the way, that is the paradigm shift. It's not the failure to get the right answer. It's the inability to ask the right questions will always signal the collapse that's coming. And it seems to me that's when the demons appear. That's when we are at our weakest. And porn is occupying that space because of the technological explosion that we've had during your entire life, man.
That's right. That's right.
I'm old enough. I'm older enough than Kale to say I got to straddle, like Augustine or Descartes, the end of the one and the beginning of the other. Because I grew up in the age of radio, newspapers, and television, not in the age of the internet, but I got to see it born. And I remember when the Wii gaming console came out. I'm a professor, and the kids were telling me what it was, and I said, well, get ready for Wii porn, because that'll be here in 10 minutes. And they were like, what? And I'm like, look, I'm just telling you, we are in an age right now of what I call disorientation, where technology has allowed us routinely to violate Aristotle's rule of non-contradiction.
That's right.
Which means two people can't be in the same place at the same time and one person can't be two places at the same time. But we do it with our smartphones routinely, where we are spiritually, emotionally, and psychically someplace outside of our body while we are physically in a different space. And so it does not surprise me at all that porn has become so extreme, because it seems to me that it is expressing a human desire to recapture a physical connection with the landscape and with ourselves and with each other. And I was on a Spaces last week where we were talking about that. And I said, make no mistake about what Elon Musk has done with X. Look at what we're doing now. We're sitting in a room in real time and we are chatting with each other. He's bringing something back through technology that was actually lost because of technology. And I think that is something that we need to note.
And my own disquiet with technology, was finally, I finally became okay with this stuff when I realized that this is not the final destination, right? That what we're doing right here is sort of learning how to do something again, like Greg says, that we have lost. But the end, the telos of this is ultimately a hopefully, if I have anything to say about it, a sort of a deeper sense of embodiment, right? And what the cruel reality of pornography is that it is exactly a kind of accelerant to disembodiment.
Yes.
So if you think about, think about the image of the Matrix, right? And what Neo sees is, right, he sees those racks of bodies that are all kind of arranged in a sort of a battery formation. And if you understand the way the word battery comes from, our concept of a battery that powers something is a sort of a collection of a bunch of things all oriented toward a singular goal. So you think of like a battery of an army, a battery of artillery, right? So the batteries are sort of this sort of ultimately sourced power, like going kind of into a one. So anyway, Neo has this image of human batteries, right? And I think it's really important that we understand, and this is going to be true. It's already true, but this is going to be true of AI, right? But understand that we've already been kind of living through AI, through online pornography, right? And so that what people need to understand, either those who are caught in the throes of it or those of us who are trying to like warn people about it, or both, right, is that the online pornography needs you. Like, you are its batteries, right? And so I think it's really important. And of course, you can immediately see what I'm doing here with the I don't even know if it's a metaphor, right? But that this is exactly like, the demons, if we will, the spirits need you. The vampire needs you. It's sourcing you and your blood because it doesn't have a life that on its own.
And speaking of this in terms of evil, essentially, don't forget, G.K. Chesterton says that the all-loving God will do no thing that he can delegate to one of his creatures to do. But Satan is precisely the opposite. He can do no thing except through one of God's creatures. So your point is extremely well taken. And you see the Matrix and us as the battery, even in the sense of a battery, like a source of power.
That's why I explicitly mean that. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's completely factually true.
Yeah. Right, the Matrix itself is the vampire writ large.
Right. Right. And so you think of, you think of something like, I don't know, like Pornhub, right? Pornhub doesn't exist, right? It doesn't have energy or power until you have people clicking on it, right? I mean, and so all of it is sort of cascading from a whole series of people in the furtive shadows in their rooms or whatnot. It needs you, and I don't think people quite confront that, see that, understand that.
Well, and it's part of the seduction, because look at the apple that's held out. The apple that's held out. I've just finished. I'm finishing up Kale. I always think of you when I walk into my classroom when I'm doing my film classes, because Kale and I joked. They were like, if they came to us and they said, all right, you can live in any other age but the one you're presently in. He and I both immediately were like, make me a medieval monk. Give me the tonsure.
Not even close.
Send me back to the
I can see that.
I'll be good. But the fact of the matter is, Kale and I found ourselves in this time and in this place, and I'm going to go ahead and just say it. We decided that we were going to confront these things because this is the time that we were put into. But you know, the vampiric myth is a rewriting, is a reasserting of a principle of evil that the, you know, secular humanism tried to simply pronoun away, to say that there was no such thing as evil. You know, you look at I gave a talk a few years ago called Our Monsters Ourselves, and it was a contemplation of film, but it was very much like what we're talking about now, where I was using film in the 20th century to say, look at how the collective anxieties of a generation will be expressed in the kind of horror films that it makes and it consumes. Right. So after Hiroshima, we get God, you know, the Godzilla myth, and it's a sudden anxiety about be careful what you wish for and be careful how far science goes. Jurassic Park is the new iteration of that fear. But then, you know, you get Psycho, and you have the appearance of the serial killer, and that runs all the way from the 60s to the 70s, and we're operating on a principle of evil there, that it's a pathology, it's a virus, it's a disease, it's something that you catch that can be cured through psychology or through medicine. At the end of every Halloween movie, you've got a psychiatrist popping out saying, don't hurt him. We can get him to the hospital and study him so that we can cure this.
Right.
And then what happens? That the apotheosis of that whole myth is in Scream, and is followed by, interestingly enough, our greatest vampire for my generation is Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah. Sure.
That is what he is. And then you get a new horror film. What's the one with Liv Tyler in it? Kale, The Strangers.
Oh, I haven't seen that one yet.
Yeah. And so that was what my talk was about. I was like, you can hop, skip, and a jump and look at these different sort. Cabin in the Woods wants to trade on all of them, which is hilarious.
Right.
But and does so brilliantly. But every age in the interregnum. You'll get the pop-up of and zombies will have to be talked about, walkers, Walking Dead, because we're in that age now, and that does express a sort of collective fear. I'm interested to hear what you guys would say it's a fear of.
What, zombies?
Yes.
Okay,
can I add something? Yeah, let me. Can I hop in real quick?
Yeah, please. Yeah,
sure.
This is kind of hilarious. Well, first of all, one thing I just want to get in really quick. It's not just our viewership that's the life force that is the vampires leeching off of. It's actually like ejaculation, you know, sperm coming out of the body when, you know, the act, like that's kind of the end of the ritual, so to speak, or at least it's
I think it's right.
Yeah, it's kind of like the pinnacle of it, and then everything after sucks. And then then it goes again. That's kind of how it works. But what I was gonna say is, like, your viewership's the battery, but also you're just giving up seed to waste. It's not going anywhere. It's not actually giving any life. And you actually start pushing yourself away from people that you're actually with, like my ex-wife. It destroys intimacy because you're giving your life force to this vampire
elsewhere.
Elsewhere.
Well, and yes, and the eroticism of the vampire too, you know, in the 20th century and in the 21st century, look at what the actual physical act itself is. It's the vampire taking something away, not giving something to. I know that there's, in some of the myths, there's an intermingling of blood, but he's literally sucking it out of the victim. He's not giving something to. And so, Mac, your point is very well taken. I would also point out that, going back to the question of the ritual behavior that addicts go through, I wanted to ask, you know, when you're at the point at which you're on the cusp of opening the door, I imagine that the psychological state that you're in is one of desire and remorse at the same time, which is precisely the opposite way that you would feel if you were a Catholic standing in line for communion. So it's again, it's a mockery and a perversion of everything that's associated with the good.
Great point. No, that totally makes sense. It's like you're in this gravitational field.
Yeah.
You don't want to talk to anybody. Like one time I remember, and this was, I actually documented my last relapse was
Right.
last December. So I'm almost a year sober now.
Mm-hmm.
And I documented it in one of my podcasts. That one's Getting Back in the Ring. But I got to this state of mind where it just felt like I was captive. I have described it before talking to people, like almost like I am possessed, like I am in this trance. Like I just can't stop it. I can't stop the momentum of this power that's coming towards me. But really, if you just take a second to just step outside of that and break free of it and to get help, to say a prayer, to get outside, that can be all you need to completely break the spell, for that moment. Obviously, you got to put in more work later to be less susceptible to it,
Yeah.
but that's how you can break it. But really quick before I lose my train of thought, the other point I was thinking about as we were talking about movies. Okay, so let me this is gonna be interesting. I'm curious on how you guys are gonna react to this. But I remember like when I was in high school going into college, one of the movies that just took everyone by storm, mainly women, was Twilight,
Yeah.
which was a vampire werewolf movie, but it's like a teen romance.
Yeah.
And what that did, now that we're kind of talking about this and how there's reflections, that was around the time that smartphones became a thing. It was like 2008. That was like when I was a junior in high school.
Yeah, 2008 and 9. So
Yeah.
the iPhone comes out in '08, and 09 is when it's fully activated with text messaging. So that's really about the time.
Yeah, and I'm gonna see when did Twilight
It's right
come
at that
out?
time because
It's right around that
it
time.
was right in the immediate
2008.
it was right in the immediate aftermath of the last Harry Potter book.
Yeah, and
Book.
and that's kind of interesting because I feel like at least like Harry Potter, the way that I remember it was just very wholesome, very black and white, like good and evil. And then Twilight comes out, and I just remembered, I did remember watching that with like my sisters or my cousins. We just go
Yeah.
see. I didn't care. I was like, this is
Yeah,
kind of
whatever.
funny
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
But now you look back on it, it actually kind of made vampirism like sexy.
Of course. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and vampirism something that happens at a younger age when you're in high school. And that's something that strikes me a little bit because when you look at Pornhub, there's some new laws coming into place where there's age verification laws where they're just pulling out of those states. They a lot of their traffic comes from underage users,
Yeah,
minors.
of course.
And I just couldn't help but just make that point about Twilight. It kind of just felt like that kind of lined up a little bit
Yeah,
because
I think with a certain frame and a certain attitude, you can absolutely see those as sort of preparations for a kind of, because think about it, what it does, it's sort of making cool, alternatives and like, oh, the woe is me stuff. I mean, it's so transparently affective in terms of what it's sort of priming you to do, and like, you're supposed to sort of feel deeply along with Bella, and in the whole thing. I think it's absolutely some kind of preparation for it. I mean, again, that I hope people understand. It's not pornography,
right.
right? But it's boy, it really starts running the line of like emotional porn, right? Which, as we know, is way more of a temptation for women and girls than it is for guys, right? And so there's this sort of this weird, you know yeah, it's differently valenced, I think.
Yeah, and just I think it just made me think about movies and how that started to become kind of popular again. I think with like the younger generation, almost
Mhm.
like you have the classics. I remember I a few weeks ago watched the black and white Mummy
Yeah,
with Boris Karloff, and
yeah,
I just love that. There was
yeah,
something about that movie with his stare
yep,
that
yep.
reminded me of probably the stare that I'm giving when I'm looking at porn.
Oh, wow, that's really
It's
interesting.
just
That's
like
an
this
yeah.
gaze,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
like you're just
yeah.
locked into it. But
Well,
yeah,
Matt,
sorry if I derailed that a little bit,
no, no,
but
no.
No,
I don't think you did at all because the point I wanted to make about Twilight is notice and Kale, you'll remember this from I think maybe did you read Stirrings of Culture by any chance,
who's
Kale?
by? Who's the guy?
Gail Stroud. It was an institute book.
Yeah.
Okay, I ran into it when I was working on my master's at UD, and it's fascinating. But there was an essay in it called "Fat in the Female Body," and it was about body aesthetics through the ages, and how from the 70s forward, the Twiggy look hit. And you remember this. By the time we were in the 90s, you and I commented, we're like, why is it that runway models all look like little boys or hangers? And to me, it is the aesthetic shifts because one is this denial of and huge fear of death. And so we are beginning to look like Egyptians in the fact that in order to deny the fact that we're aging and that we're mortal and that we must pass through death, we deny it by shaving all our hair off. But this in turn tantalizes us and sexualizes the child at the same time. And Mac, to go back to the analogy I made to The Exorcist, what you're seeing in that juvenilization of the vampire myth is you just got a glimpse at the enemy's hand. The target is innocence. The target is the child. The target is the female because the female is the source of corporeal life. And so the tool that gets used is the male, but really the target of all of it is the female. I put this in sort of college level blunt terms in my classes sometimes when I talk to my college age students about hookup culture. And I say, look, I understand hookup culture, but I've never honestly met one person that was ever happy in it. They're miserable. And I imagine it must be the same thing with you guys in recovery when you're talking about, did you ever meet anybody that was just happy-go-lucky, so happy that they were addicted to porn? They're not. There's something deeply, deeply saddening about it. And I don't think any individual can ever escape that. But the way I jokingly put it in my classes is I'm like, look, even if you want to pretend that two consenting adults can do with each other whatever they want, at the end of the day, what you're really doing is you're walking up to somebody and saying, hey, do you want to go back to my place and rub stuff?
Right.
Because all you're doing is using another person for your own gratification and allowing them to do the same thing to you. And that saddens me just to think about it.
So it's tautological at its sort of contraceptive core, right?
Which really means that it's not sex at all. It's just the sin of onan. It's turning the sexual desire, masquerading as a desire for something else, for someone else. But it's really narcissistic, and it's really turning in on you become your own vampire.
Right. And it's what it all it does, is all it does is enervate. Right. It shreds you of any sense of potency, any sense of masculine power, right? I mean, and so you look, even I'm remembering parts of the novel. I haven't read the novel in 25 years, but Bram Stoker I'm talking about. But there are these huge portions where the marks are listless and they're like just they can't do anything and they're depleted, right? Now again, blood there is being used as a metaphor, but that's fine. I mean, I think we can run with that because that is precisely who stands to benefit by having legions of young men enervated.
Just wasting themselves.
Right. Bad folks, right? Clearly people who want to turn a buck. I mean, they're just digital pimps, right? But there's something underneath that. There's something behind that that is, manifest. As Greg here, I think correctly invokes The Exorcist. That it's there is something behind it, right? Because if you think of having, again, I'm using like a legion of men, right? A Roman legion of potent men, what if you could get them to unman themselves, right? En masse. Well, that's pretty useful. That's pretty useful.
Well, haven't we? I mean, social media is filled. Is filled with what you'll notice there's some pushback on social media now. And a reassertion of the manly man that I play on on X all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah,
I'm the
absolutely.
I'm the last person in the world that you would look at necessarily and think, well, he's a manly man. Um,
we
but
we poetry teachers,
yes, but the point is there's a real craving for it out there among men and women alike, and it's a very, very healthy craving. I'm not surprised to see it. And
it's a crave. Oh, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead, Matt.
I was gonna say, I think it's like a craving of purpose. Like I think people are craving purpose. And when I think about the vampire myth, the characters that typically fall under that spell, maybe they don't have that strong enough purpose or connection to where they see this shiny object, this handsome figure. I mean, I can look back on life on like past relationships where I felt like it was more kind of brought in through like the physical, versus just, being more mature, having a more open mind about what you're getting yourself into, versus seeing that shiny, flashy object, that lure in front of you and say, I think I'm going to go for that, versus if you have that purpose and you have that higher, I mean, obviously, I think we've talked about it already, but like having faith, being connected with Christ, to me, I mean, that saved my life, when I was at my deepest, darkest moments, like above all else. Like that's actually the first part of, there is Alcoholics Anonymous, but there's also Porn Addicts Anonymous. My brother actually went through it. And of course, the first part, the first tenet of it is to have a higher power.
Right.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's that I think that's at the root of it. The denial in secular humanism of a higher power. Paris is festooned at either end of the Champs-Élysées, as George Weigel brilliantly used in his book, The Cube and the Cathedral. Right. We have Notre Dame at one end, which was the foundation for Western civilization, and then at the other end we have the Cube, which is a monument to atheism. And these are the twin poles of the modern age. And at the same time, Mac, what I would say, now this is my experience. Kale met me when I was young and sorry, but thankfully he met me when I was married. Yeah. But he can attest, my experience with all of that when I was a younger person was that the whole hookup culture thing, all of that, it literally scared me. And I feel like God was watching out for me. I went on a stint when I was an undergraduate, and I wrote for a television series out in LA. And I was only planning to stay there for the summer. And then at the end of the summer, they said, look, we're like the work that you do so much. We want you to stay. And frankly, LA scared the hell out of me. And I said, no, I'm going to go back. I hadn't been to Rome yet, Kale. You know what I mean? So that was my thing. I was like, I'm not missing Rome. And I'm afraid that if I stay out here, I tell people jokingly now, I was like, I had a moment where I had a vision of myself getting spit out of the ass end of the gay porn industry 2.5 years down the line, just because of the way I looked.
Yeah.
Because
you went from the Cube to the Cathedral, literally.
Exactly. So I ran in the other direction. Yeah. And I thank my lucky stars. I didn't realize how weird I was until I was much older.
Right.
But I feel like there were the better angels were looking out for me.
And to your point about the Cube and the Cathedral, and Mac, to your point about the meaning crisis, my sense is that monsters hover around all meaning crises, right? And the various manifestations of the different monsters sort of perhaps manifest different aspects of the particular thing, right? And all meaning crises sort of circulate around I think the ultimate anti-siren song, or the ultimate siren song, which is nihilism. Right. And sort of hovering around this whole thing is, and I think you see this in the Dracula myth. I think you see this in the pornography, is does my body mean? In other words, does what I do with my body matter? Does my body matter? Is my body mattering? Right. You can sort of play with this whole thing, but you get that sense, right? And so that, and everybody, wants to mean. Right. And even you look at what is his name? Renfield, I think, is Dracula's sort of lackey helper. He's like devoted to, the Dark Lord in essence. Right. And so he's sort of trying to fill his own, sort of nihilism with some kind of meaning. But I'm struck by by, you know, you serve the cube or you serve the cathedral. Like they're really, I think you have to hammer that home in a variety of different ways, right? Either, and it's like this, like either it matters, you know, if you sort of, you know, go up into your room and fire up the phone and find some videos and masturbate. Like, does that matter? Right.
Right.
And for my whole life, right, you know,
Great
so
point.
for my whole life, the important people, the fancy people, you know, the people who are in charge of our institutions were like, that doesn't matter. Stop
Right.
it. You're
Right.
being a prude, Kale. You're
Boys
being
will be boys.
right. You know, you're being uptight and rigid, and you just, you just need a release, right? That was sort of the
But yeah, and look at how the grand seduction happened. You know, over the last 60 years, the women's liberation movement was to convince women to use their bodies the way men do
right.
first.
That's right.
And now it's all ended in toxic masculinity and transgenderism. And look at what transgenderism actually does. It cancels out women completely. And it also strangely cancels out homosexuality. Because if you're a male homosexual, you're really a woman trapped in a man's body attracted to men. And if you're a lesbian, you're a man trapped in a woman's body attracted to women. And so it's transgenderism is heteronormative.
Yeah.
And they
Oddly enough.
They don't even seem to realize.
No, it's so true. It's like it requires the stereotypes in order to sort of lean into this thing. And look, and again, underneath this whole thing, nihilism, right?
Yep.
You mean nothing. Your body means nothing. What you do then with your body means nothing. Because then I want to ask these folks who sort of would call me a prude, you know, or old fashioned, you know, for being, you know, against masturbation and pornography. You know, it's like, you know, well, then what's the difference? Like, you know, as Greg correctly pointed out, and I used to tell this to my students, you know, it's like, why is one form of friction okay and another form of friction not okay?
Exactly.
Right? If it's just material substrate, right, if that's all there is, then, you know, yeah, why not, you know, backwards and forwards and up and down? Like, what's the difference? I mean, so, you know, so you can see for me, Mac, the way this thing cascades back up is that, yes, actually, you know, here's the thing, like to say out loud, you know, yes, God cares if you masturbate, right? And again, think about how crazy that sounds to sort of the rank and file. Like if I were to sort of go into like when a normal, you know, we're a regular classroom anywhere, and I would say that, like, how many people would be like, oh yeah, I guess so. I mean, everybody would think I was nuts.
Yeah.
Right? But I don't know where, how do you stop that thought process? I don't know.
Well, and here's the other thing I want to notice that goes right along with it, Mac and Kale. You know, in Shakespeare's time, the word obscene literally means that which cannot be seen on stage.
Yeah.
Sacraments were never shown
out of
scene, and so we've lost our sense of obscenity because we've turned our art into nothing but transgression, and the transgression is always of the sacred.
Yeah, it's parasitic. It's fundamentally parasitic. That's right.
Yes,
that's right.
and it fundamentally is attacking literally the female body. You know, the Greeks, the Romans, all the way through Elizabethan times, there was a sense that the difference between the female and the male body is that our reproductive organs are on the outside. Right. We can bump into things with them. They're not pretty. So the Greeks had no problem with the male nude at all. But you notice that they were shy about the female nude.
Yeah.
And the Romans were shy about it because they were like, no, the gods formed this body with a secret in it, with a sacred secret in it. And it is not to be transgressed. It is not to be. And so in Psycho, for instance, if you notice the painting on the wall that Norman Bates takes off to peek through the hole is a painting of that scene in the Old Testament where the lecherous old high priests are, you know, spying on the bathing woman.
I forgot about that.
Wow.
I forgot about that.
That's a gem right there.
Hey,
listeners.
Yeah. Pay attention to those details, folks. They're great filmmakers don't waste a thing.
That's cool.
I had to look that up. And when you go into Norman Bates's room, when Lila goes in, the sister of Marion, right, and looks at his room, he's in his bedroom. He's in a state of arrested adolescence. he is emasculated, and this is brilliant. She picks up a book and there's no title of it, and she opens it up and her eyes widen, but we never get to know what that book was. And she looks over at the phonograph, and Kale, guess what the record is on the phonograph? Eroica. And so it's, you know, it's just this constellation of these little brilliant Hitchcockian details that give you a whole slice of who Norman Bates is. And I don't want to derail the talk into Psycho, but all of these contemplations of evil and the manifestations of evil and what our counter to that evil is going to be. That's why you and I, Kale and Mac, we love the Lord of the Rings so much. Because it recognizes the evil for what it is, and it confronts it using all of its tools. And notice this, you know, Tolkien in the Silmarillion offers us a twin, a coin of evil. On the one side is the vampire principle. That's the demon principle. That's Sauron. Yeah. That's the one that can do no thing except through other creatures. He has no power otherwise. Right. But the other side of that coin is the spider metaphor of evil. And this one, Ungoliant, Shelob. And you notice that Sauron has to allow Shelob to just live on the edges of Mordor because he can't defeat her. This is not exploited in the film, but in the books you get this, that Melkor and Ungoliant battled for an entire age against each other to a draw. But what I would point out is if you watch, and Mac, this dovetails into what porn is and how it operates in this evil world. If you watch Eyes Wide Shut, what you're going to notice is that every evil cult operates the same way. It dangles an apple of desire and power in front of you and makes you feel that if you do certain things, you'll be moving up a ladder to more knowledge. It's Gnostic, right, Kale? To more knowledge and more power. But what you don't realize is actually happening to you is that you're not moving. A spiral is actually spinning around you. And rather than going up, you're actually in the concentric rings of Dante's Inferno. And the corkscrew is turning around you, giving you the illusion of motion and control and the exercise of your will. And when you finally realize where you are, it's too late. And at that point, Mac, you know, some people like heroin addicts, they just give themselves over to it and resign themselves to being permanently lost. And so it's going to take a Kale, help me out here. Who's the Greek figure that steals his way into hell to rescue Eurydice?
Eurydice. Hold on. Hercules.
Anyway,
Hercules.
And Mac, I just want to compliment you because I feel like you're performing that kind of service, is that you're reaching into the Inferno and you're trying to extend an arm to people saying, look, you know, you feel lost, you feel like there are too many rings around you, you're too far gone. That's not true. That's actually been the goal of the demon or the vampire or whatever you've been seduced by the whole time, is to get you to give up hope, right? Kale, that's it.
Yeah, I think so, right? So what do you think? So Mac, using this discussion about vampirism and the monster thing, how do you think that would help folks to see more clearly, this spirit, this egregore of pornography? By calling it a vampire, I mean, how do you see that helping? I mean, I sense it. I'm just curious as to what your sense of that is.
Yeah, it's almost, you have to like awaken that inner Van Helsing in you, basically. I want to, because I think part of what I see my role is, like, I'm not a psychologist, I started coaching, very small right now with that, but I do have a perspective from my personal experience of going into the depths, right? Where I feel like multiple times in my life had said, you know what, I'm just going to give myself up to this. It's too powerful. I can't defeat this. And to be able to be in the pits and then to rise up. And now I am definitely channeling my Van Helsing every day.
Yeah. I love
that. I look at porn as a vampire that in my life and hopefully in other people's lives, we can, and this is what I think I wrote down a little bit, but like to kill a vampire, right? Typically you drive a stake, like a cross through its heart.
Yeah.
And I think that is such a beautiful image, is literally holding a cross in your hand, carrying your cross,
Yeah.
carrying these things in your life. Like for me, porn typically for me was a way to escape. It was a way to numb.
Sure. Yeah.
There was the temptation, the allure of it, but really me, like I just wanted to escape. There was that nihilism almost. I just wanted to wade in that nihilism and
Yep.
just to not feel anything. But like you said, the more and more you power that and you interact with it, the more nihilistic you get to where you just like, this doesn't matter anymore. But
Yeah. Yeah.
to carry that, and to carry that weight, to carry my cross and understand that porn is not, it's not victimless. And I think that's what we get tricked into
Mhm.
believing, is that,
Totally.
hey, like I'm just gonna let this thing suck on me. I'm actually fine. I'm gonna live forever. Like I can do this forever. I'll
Yeah.
just let it suck on me. It's not gonna affect anybody else. But obviously, in the literature and in the movies, like the partner of the person that's being fed on is like, what the heck is going on? Like
Yeah.
you're cheating on me. You won't even pay attention to me. Like, do I even matter anymore? Like I care about you. Like these are all things that were said in my previous relationship and going through the divorce process, where
Mhm.
unfortunately, that union just got to a point to where it was broken. But with that being said, I want to tell people from my experience climbing out of the inferno to say, hey, like I went through this crap. I went to the point of depression to where I remember screaming out, like, what does this matter? It
Right.
doesn't matter. That's like when I knew that my divorce was going to happen. That's when we
Right.
had that talk, and I was so miserable. I
Yeah.
was sobbing. I was completely just pathetic, broken. And I remember the one thing I write about this, I talk about this a lot. It just felt like I was in a raging stream, and the boulder that I held on to was Christ. The boulder was Christ, and reconnecting with Christ, reconnecting with that purpose beyond all purposes, the aim beyond all aims, is that relationship with Christ. And that really pulled me out of the pit to where, and it gave me this fire to say, hey, with Christ behind me and hopefully, living through me,
Mhm.
I can preach this message out through my podcast, through my writings, so that
Right.
other people can see this for what it really is in their life. Because being in that conditioning, being fed on for 20 plus years since I was like 10, right? It pisses me off.
Okay. I want to ask
Yeah.
you about that. The
Yeah.
anger part. Go ahead.
Yeah, but it pisses me off. It also makes me feel just that sadness that could happen to somebody else, and it is. Like I have nephews, I have a niece. I hope to have kids someday, hopefully. And I just think about them a lot, and
Yeah.
where they're at in their life, and how probably someone like me, when I had dial-up internet, and I think the first time I watched was at a friend's house.
Yeah.
Now it's like kids have iPads, kids have
Oh.
phones, and
Oh
you don't
yeah.
know what's gonna happen. Like,
Yeah.
and you're basically like, they're just the vampires are like coming in to kindergarten, to like they're entering into these spaces, I think, where they weren't entering in before because of social media, of the internet, of having these devices at your hand, and just not the acknowledgement that you're being fed on. So
Yeah.
you think the
Yeah.
whole time you're getting something out of it, but you're actually giving away
That's right.
your life force.
Hey,
Yeah.
before you ask about the anger thing, Kale,
Yeah.
I
Go
just
ahead.
wanted to say two things. One, Orpheus,
That's it. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think that the
Orpheus and
weapon,
Eurydice. Yeah.
yes, and Max, so that you know, Orpheus was the most beautiful singer, um,
I'll have
on
to
the
work on
planet.
that a little bit.
And so think about what the myth is. He is granted sort of permission to go down into Hades and rescue Eurydice, and Eurydice. So we have to rescue beauty.
Mhm.
Yeah.
If we are going to erect a culture that is going to prize the sacred and not waste ourselves with pornography and these seductions, we have got to rescue beauty in all of its manifestations. Kale, you'll agree with me. The reason that the Trojans lose the war is that they prize beauty to the point where they will steal it.
Right.
But then what they do with it is they hide it away.
Yeah.
We only get to see Helen once.
That's right.
And and her beauty is so arresting, it literally stops the war. It's one of the most beautiful moments in literature. And I think that that's what the monsters that we've been talking about, the great demon who manifests himself as the vampire or as the Walking Dead, is always in a battle against. Fred Turner, he calls beauty the virtue of virtue. So if we had to choose a word, there's only two candidates for the word that the war is actually against, and it's either beauty or love. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
And those are the things that are being attacked by pornography. This is what I try to remind this is myself of, Mac, and this is to you. I remind myself that every face I meet is a face of God's love for me that I could not know unless I met that face.
I love that.
But I also remind myself that my face is that to other people as well. And if that doesn't moderate your behavior toward your fellow man, then go back and read Moby Dick 10 more times.
Yeah, I mean that's like radical stuff, right? I mean, and this is the radical, game changer, paradigm crusher of the incarnation in the Imago Dei, right? So I wanted to ask you, so in keeping with this, the Imago Dei thing, I teach the Inferno every year, and this time around, I'm doing my thing with Dante, and I really, different things occur to you each year you read it, right? And so this time around, I spent a lot of time with my kids talking about how Dante learns how to get angry at sin, right? Because at the beginning of the story, he's moved by it. He's what we would call soft-hearted. He's like, oh, poor Francesca and Paolo, right? And he sort of swoons and he passes out. And anyway, so finally, as he sort of makes his way through this journey, he learns to see all of the bullshit stripped away. Right.
Yeah.
He learns to see that actually the proper response to sin is not to sort of be moved, but actually it's to be angered by it. Right. And he's angered by it in part because he sees he sees what the choices these people have made has done to the body. And it's so fascinating to me that the Inferno is so bodily, right? That the whole time. What's that?
I was just going to say, Kale, you're onto it. First of all, we are ensouled bodies.
Right.
We are not souls in bodies, Mac.
Right.
We are bodies in souls.
Right.
Okay. And the thing is, Kale, you and I need to write this book because we talked about this way back in the 90s, the scandal of the incarnation.
That's right.
The scandal of Christianity is that life is through the body and redemption will be accomplished through the body. So of course the body is being attacked.
Right. So Mac, so you think about, you said that there's people will kid themselves into thinking that pornography is the sort of what kind of crime did you call it? I heard
victimless.
Victimless crime, right? Victimless crime, right? These are consenting adults, or these are victimless crimes, right? And we could put aside for a minute the sort of the revenge porn and all that kind of stuff, whatever, but
like teen porn or
that's obvious, that's obvious, right? But the whole idea, right? So that the crime is the thing itself, right? And because because it is fundamentally an attack on the inherent dignity of a human being made in the image and likeness of God. Right. So what is more of a mockery of God and was more a mockery of us is to see the kind of filmed degradation spawn, after click after click after click after click, right? It's not a victimless crime. That person, of course, is affected by this, which is scaled both in the moment of production and in every moment of reproduction, right?
Forever.
Reproduction, interesting, right? It's because it's fruitless reproduction every time it gets a click, right? But then every person who consumes it, uses it, however you want to frame that, is also then participating in that original violation and then every other violation from that point forward. And when you start to sort of when you lay it out this way, how can your response to pornography be anything but blinding white anger? It has to be. It has to be. and yet look at how casual it's all become. One of my internet friends always talks about, that Friends is like the great like devil of pop culture, because what did it do more than anything else? It normalized that bros use porn. Just
Yeah.
is what it is. Like, ha 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 ha.
Yeah.
Everything is, Joey and Chandler. It's always like there are these porn jokes all the time, right? And it's sort of like that did more to make us casual, or allow for us to be casual in the degradation of our form. So if you remember, Greg, in Inferno, Dante sees the body is twisted, and when he really finally loses it, he sees the twisted body of the sorcerers, and he sees the ripped open body of the heretics, and he sees the transformed and melding into one another, the loss of form itself through the thieves, and that's when he sort of he's overcome. And so then that final image is Ugolino chewing on the head of Roger.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like so physically eating the body of his mate, right?
Right.
And so how could you not be angry about that? Well, the problem for us is that we don't see it. We choose not to see it. We're sort of, we're confounded by boobs and blah blah blah, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, it looks good, shocking, right? So it just
Right.
it's just so easy to sort of lose your proper anger at it, right? And I don't know quite how do you resurrect that sense of that.
I would add to
yeah.
I would add to it, Kale, too. And Mac, this goes to your own very personal experience. You notice that this exploitation of the sexual aspect of human beings is an attack against marriage.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, that the Catholics teach that the sexual act is reserved for the conjugal state, for the married state. And it's reserved for that state for a reason, because the expression of that conjugal love actually produces another body. Yeah. So I want to go back to that white hot anger that once I had somebody I was working with one time in when I was bartending back in Louisiana, and this kid said,
Nymphas.
a bunch of, and Kale can attest to this.
I know who you're talking about too.
Yeah, Baton Rouge has an inordinate number of extraordinarily beautiful women down there. Something's in the water. It's weird.
I think you mentioned that on my first podcast.
Yeah, it's crazy, actually.
Not to trigger anybody.
Yeah,
but my buddy in the bar is like, these girls walked in and he said, I know you're married and you're a good guy, but you can't tell me you don't look at that. And I said, no, I don't. He said, why? Because you're married? And I said, no, it's not marriage that cures that. I said, I have daughters.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Dude.
And
that's right.
It's crazy.
Right.
But I also told him something else. I said, but I also know something that you don't know. And at the time I had 4 kids. And he said, what's that? And I said, I know my boys can swim. You don't know whether yours can or not. So you got to spread them around. And it was something like, you know what I mean? It was something like a George Costanza joke, but on the other hand, there was a little bit of seriousness in it too.
Sure.
Because that very power that is being wasted in the sin of Onan is also proof that I have enough of it to make it rain. I got enough of it. I'm so rich, I'm so potent, I'm so masculine that I can just waste this stuff. Other people have to reserve theirs.
Right.
And so I think, again, it's another perversion. But it goes to our need to sponsor a rescuing of beauty and a rescuing of the sacred, a rescuing of the liturgy, of formality even. Kale Zelden got 1 million hits a couple of weeks ago when he said that people should stop wearing baseball hats unless they're playing baseball.
Right. It's true. I was like, wild.
Yeah, just
awesome.
crazy.
Hey, that makes sense though. Okay, so
one more thing, and I find it interesting, and you see this in both the Dracula myth and in all of their various movies, right? I don't think we have to sort of just hew ourselves to the sort of the novel, so the whole, if we can kind of consider the thing, I'm fascinated by the way in which the victims, the assenting victims to the sort of the vampiric, willingly participate in their own humiliation ritual.
Yeah.
And Greg, you're tying this to, that which is reserved, this sort of this procreative and unitive thing that is reserved in this sort of the special and hidden place, interestingly enough.
Yes.
that everything about pornography is an inversion and a humiliation of that which it is supposed to be, right?
Right.
And so if you look at all the various fetishes and all the various, and all porn has a kind of script, right? I mean, it sort of plays out in exactly the same way.
Right.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is meant to be a mockery of it, soup to nuts, right? Sorry.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
really, really is, from the sort of the circling and the courting to the final,
Annihilation.
climax. Right. And so for both of them, the man and the woman in this act, both of them, instead of being brought together in this thing that could bring about life, both of them are kind of soiled and destroyed, ripped out, desolated, right?
Yeah.
Both of them are desolated, and it's like, there it is. I mean, that is sort of the perfect inversion of the anti-spirit.
And I want to
That's a
go
good
back
word.
to my analogy to Eyes Wide Shut and the evil cult, because I didn't finish that thought on the the twins of the vampire and the spider.
Yeah.
The vampire is ultimately going to be consumed. The spider principle of evil is that principle of evil that is so envious of God and his creative power that it wants to devour everything in the universe that can say I. So that I can only be said through the spider's mouth. Because notice what happens to the spider as she feeds. She just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so, our name is Legion for we are many. So as we are encircled by the vampiric agents of evil, right? Ultimately, what's going to happen is the spider herself will descend in an anti-female consuming of all of life, sucking even all of the vampiric agents with you, willing victims, into her belly. At least that's what I think. I think that's what Tolkien was going for in the Silmarillion, and I fundamentally agree with it.
Yeah, I like that. I need to revisit that. That's really good. That's really good.
And in my novel, Kale, The Incorruptibles, I ended up creating a talisman, which was a black, a cult cross with the body of Christ crucified on it. But on the back of it, there was a serpentine figure, hugging it upside down with the head of a wolf, curling itself, twisting grotesquely, and beginning to consume the feet of Christ himself.
Wow, that's good.
Which I don't know where I got this image from. It really kind of even scares me. But there's a whole thing in the novel about it.
It came to you, it came to you.
Yeah,
but gosh, that's like really, I really enjoy talking to both of you. It's been great.
As you can see, we enjoy talking to you and each other.
Right. We're wide open.
Yeah. I guess just to touch on the anger real quick. I think for me, I look back and there are feelings of sadness, regret, when I look back at my marriage that failed. But honestly, like the biggest is the anger. I think the anger of what transpired, what the kind of person I was reduced to. And really what I want to say to the listeners is typically the anger that's going to come out first is probably going to be from your wife or from your partner, your girlfriend, whatever. And I look back at that and I feel like my ex's anger was very justified. Like very righteous anger, like
righteous indignation is real.
Like what you were talking about, with that Van Helsing, like, this is like, what the heck are you doing? That's like what I got in my relationship. And I think she was right. But what I was conditioned to believe was that there's nothing wrong with this. Like, I'm not cheating on you. I'm not, like, I love you. Like, we're married. Like, I would never, and I never had any issues with that part. It was just, the porn, anytime I wanted to escape, it just would call my name and I'd go there. Right. And then obviously that's bad, but then also the lying about it really is the worst part. And I'll tell all the listeners that, like, the lying about it, like, you can work through this with your partner. You can work through this with your wife. Like, if you did the math on how many guys have watched porn, I mean, it's like just about everyone's watched it, unless you're like a unicorn. So there's ways that you can move through it. But the real danger is if you let go of that anger and you let go of how much of that has been an attack on you, and the relationships that you have. And like I was talking about before, like I want to wake people up to that, because it took me a really long time to figure that one out. Like, it took me hitting rock bottom a few times on my own without any even realizing it. And then being in a relationship was really the catalyst for me to be like, okay, this is actually something I need to get right in my life, because I'm never going to have a fully fulfilling, loving, nurturing relationship with this in my life. And I did
Because you're
have
split.
that.
Because you're split.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I did have that for, I think, the beginning of the marriage. You know, there was a period of sobriety there where really it was just powered. And I think that's what we talk about too with porn recovery, is like people that are going to get married or going to get into a relationship. It's typically like a lie that you tell yourself.
That's
is
right.
like, oh,
That's
like if I get married, you know, it's going to go away. Like, I'm not going to, you know, whatever. I'm not going to do it anymore. Or if I get in a relationship, or if I have a kid, you know, I'm not going to look at porn anymore. And that might you know, distract you for a while. But if you don't go to the very root of like your purpose and that inner Van Helsing in you, it's going to come back if that was something that was feeding on you earlier in life. And I think
right. Because the thing hasn't been the thing hasn't been exercised.
Yeah, you
right?
haven't vanquished it
Yeah,
yet.
right.
And
You know, it's still floating around. It's just hiding. You know,
and that's the right word for it.
Yeah.
And the exorcism takes a liturgy.
Yeah, that's right.
And
that's right.
and the other thing that you need to understand, Mac, too, is the need to lie about it, and the feeling of shame that you actually had for it is proof that you are good. I don't mean a good person, that the body
Right.
matters.
Exactly.
That all of it matters, because you wouldn't lie about it if it didn't. So it's like what Augustine said about evil. Evil is proof that we are free. And
so good.
You know what I mean? Because it means our assenting to God or Christ is also not coerced. It's not a seduction. It's a free act of the will. So all of this that we've been talking about is this sacrilegious inversion of the good. And it's out of a covetous envy, a monstrous envy, that goes all the way back to Satan himself.
Yeah.
And I call people who suffer from this, they can become this. I don't think most do, but they can become what I call ruiners. They take on, they decide that they're going to take over the vampire's throne, and they become Iagos. And they say to themselves, were I Othello, then Iago I would not be. And because they cannot be Othello, then they have to set out to prove that the Othellos cannot exist. And you notice that in that play, the mechanism of Othello's destruction is to be seduced by a deception and then to commit an act of his own free will.
Right.
So it's a great topic, Mac, and I'm glad that you invited us to participate in it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and this is kind of fitting, actually. So maybe we can close it down. But as we were talking about an exorcism, I actually had a dream. It was very, you know when you get those really realistic dreams. In this one, there was I think this was about like maybe it was a little bit after, like, when my sobriety, when it started back up, because I'm almost at a year now. And I think it was
Congratulations.
thank you. It was probably at maybe like a few months after that when I was getting really back into it, because there is a period of time where you first relapse where you're just in this really bad spot where it takes a little bit of time to like get your first days, like true days of sobriety in front of you, to where you can have a really clean day and then you can build, right? And it felt like I was really getting some good momentum. Typically it's around 3 months or so. Like if you're doing it really well and you're really investing in yourself, you have a lot of good momentum. But anyways, I had this dream that there was this demonic force that was trying to kill me and my family. And it felt so real. And it was like this physical manifestation of this man, like in a car, trying to run us over. And I remember my dad actually stuck a rebar pipe through the windshield and killed the guy. But in my head, I knew that this was more than just a man. So I was anticipating that there'd be some demonic force. And in my dream, I committed an exorcism of this demon. And like, I literally like just said, like, stand back, you devil. Like in my dream, like the power of God, like I felt the power of God with me, and I just kicked the crap out of this thing and exercised it. And when I woke up, I was like, the first thing I did. Like I told you, like I talked to my brother every day. We're in this journey together, which is so cool.
Yeah.
Um, I called him. I'm like, dude, like I just I just did an exorcism in my dream,
That's so
you
good.
know?
That's so
And then
badass.
I know. And then
Yeah.
it's crazy. And then I had another dream maybe a few months after that where it was like three attractive women were bringing me into a basement, and I like totally like just resisted them. And I think they said they needed help or something, probably like the introduction to like a porno,
Yeah,
basically.
it sounds like yeah, I know what you
Yeah.
mean. Yeah,
And I
Yeah.
started to walk down the stairs, and I just remembered I think the lights were off. I turned them on, and their faces started to morph
yeah.
into these terrifying faces. And
Wow.
then the lights shut off, and I like shoved them off, closed the
Yeah.
door, like locked it. Those two dreams to me, I think it awakens an anger in me, like a white hot anger. And it's really just like the white hot, I think it's like justice. It's like
Yeah. Burns.
it's
Yes, that's right.
it's like the burning white light of
Mhm.
justice that I hope I can bring to the space, like bring to X, bring to, you know, YouTube podcasts. I could just put it out there so people can sit on it, think about it. But it's a white hot anger because I feel like I wasn't the person that I thought I was,
Right.
really. And
Right.
I feel like I never quite could look people directly in the eye when I knew that I had just looked at porn like a day before, and like I'm
Right.
seeing
Right.
my grandma or,
That's
you know,
right.
my
Yeah.
grandpa. Like my grandpa used to ask me all the time, like, hey, are you praying your rosary?
Right.
You know, are you going to
Right.
church?
Right.
And
Right.
I think he was trying to check in on me. And I'm sure those days where I met him, I might have looked at porn the morning of.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And it's just like this incongruence. And you get so upset because you're like, this is what I was like brought down to like my knees, like a dog, like this dog that every time I heard the bell, I'm just
Yeah.
going to it. And
Pavlov's dog. Right.
it pissed
Yeah.
me off so much. I'm like, I am a creation of God.
Right.
I'm an autonomous human being. I have dreams. I have hopes. I have things that I want to do in life. And if I just stick to this relationship with this vampire, I'm sure going to do things in my life, but there's always going to be that incongruence. It's always going to be tainted
Yeah.
by this relationship. I'm never going to be fully
Mm.
feeling like myself. There's always going to be this part of me that I'm kind of putting off to the side to say, hey, you know, this is Mac, but then this is Mac with porn.
Well,
Yeah.
remember, what is it? It's in Ephesians, right? You know, everything shall be known in the light, and I think that we have to remember that. You know, we're going to have to offer an account for everything we've done, and you know, it's terrifying, admittedly terrifying on some level, but it's also, you know, there's a tremendous amount of freedom. It's like, no, it actually matters. It matters how I am in public. It matters how I am in private. It matters away. And dude, I love the dream that you just shared with us because that's a gift. I'm a big believer in this. You know, I'm very comfortable with the woo, but I'm it's a great dream. And notice, I want you to pay attention to the role that your father played
Yeah.
in that scenario, right? He's the one who takes the rebar and like takes the first shot. And in essence is the little narrative that you laid out for us. In essence, it kind of gave you permission to slay the damn demon, right? And you know, you keep talking about this sort of this inner Van Helsing, right? You are preparing yourself to be the father that your own father has given you permission to be, right? And I think that that is, you know, talk about meaning, talk about purpose. Like, you know, you are preparing yourself to be the Van Helsing you're kind of imagining. I think that's just so damn important. I mean, it's
And
so important.
and I would add to that that the Father is your figure for the Father in heaven,
That's right.
who
That's right.
who has given you permission to be the you that He made you to be. Um, and I'm also reminded by the dreams of the end of No Country for Old Men,
Mm,
because the Father rides ahead,
Yeah.
right.
and the Son has to realize that the fire that the Father has lit has to be tended, and it has to be fed, and it has to be nurtured by the Son in his role as the head of the family. And I would also give you a line from my novel, The Incorruptibles, you know, that my father Rose says, Mac, places are not haunted, people are.
Mm.
So, and I'm a lucid dreamer, so I take dreams
Yeah.
very, very seriously, because I know that, you know, what we've been talking about this whole time is that there is a war going on around us between powers and principalities.
Right.
It is a spiritual war, and everything that we've been talking about is part and parcel of that war. And I know there are a lot of people out there that would think that I'm nuts for saying it, because people ask me sometimes, do you believe in ghosts? And I was like, no, I don't believe in ghosts. If I was a demon and I wanted to seduce me, I would appear to me as my loving grandmother.
Right.
And don't forget the line, and I know Kale knows it from St. Thomas More, you know, Satan, the proud spirit, cannot bear to be mocked.
Can't be laughed at.
So the weapon against this is self-deprecation and humor. Recognize what it is that is trying to entice you and see it for the ridiculousness that it is.
Great point.
And then mock it.
Yeah.
And that's your Van Helsing, you know, it's
great.
not,
I love that.
It's not that, you know, that fear-filled, you know, get thee behind me, Satan, although I admire that.
Yeah.
It's also a recognition of that, because I've been haunted my whole life. Kale knows a little bit about this. And I got to the point where when I would have these encounters, I would recognize it for what it was.
Yeah.
And I would just shake my head and say,
Nope.
you know, no, it doesn't scare me.
Yeah.
That's great. Gosh, that's great.
Because
Yeah.
I figured there's a reason I'm being stalked. So I'm like, okay, you know, and that just redoubles me in my efforts to be a good man. Which I don't do perfectly, but it's something that we as men need to encourage other men.
Yeah, we have to say it out loud. I mean, you have to say it out loud. I want to be a good man. I aspire to be a good man. Mock me all you want, but that is the point. And boy, not a lot of that, man. Not a lot of that. Especially Greg, you know, you invoked earlier, you know, the sort of the whole kind of manosphere thing. And, you know, my concern about the manosphere stuff is that it's sort of this, it's actually, it's male to male transness. It's like, it's so fake and counterfeit, you know, it's play acting at what some little boy thinks a manly man is. And it's like, no, it's not that, because it's not manly. Yeah. It's not manly unless it's good.
Right.
Yeah.
It has to be good. It has to be oriented to the good.
And for those of your listeners who don't know me, Mac, and will run into me later on X, you know, my whole persona on X is an over the top kind of mockery of the fact that all social media is driven by vanity.
That's right. That's right.
Sure. And yet what's behind my braggadocio is I have the receipts. Like I've done it. I am that. I did do that. I did, you know, I am this. I am faithful to my bride. I am keeping my promises. And that's what I said when my father died. I don't know what a man is, but he keeps his promises. And so, Mac, what you're going through in recovery is an exercise where you get to look back at some point and say, you know, I'm the kind of person that can make a promise to myself and keep it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And that's a huge foundation for everyone. And I think that in it itself has to be one of those victories that you have to say, all right, I did that, and that means I can do these other things. And with that, I think I'm going to have to run. So
yeah, we can wrap it up. I really appreciate you two. What a fantastic conversation. That really flew by. I can't wait to re-listen to this like 20 times. I can't wait. I want to thank both of you.
You're welcome, man.
And I know, Kale, you have a Substack.
I do. Yeah.
And
it's my name.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kale Zelden.
So yeah, you can get it. It's what is it? www.kalezelden at substack.substack.com. But it's called The Underneath.
Right. The
Underneath. And I do some YouTube stuff sometimes.
Okay. Yep. And I'll make sure to put your guys' links in the show notes too. And then Dr. Borse, you're on Substack as well.
I am. I haven't been to it in a while, but you know, you guys mentioned Twilight. I think I have an essay on Twilight or the start of one.
I like that.
Yeah, so I'll go back and take a look, and I'll send you the link to my Substack if people are interested in seeing what I've written about film and culture. That's what my Substack is. And really, I only started it so that I had a parking space for some of my writing. Yeah. It wasn't necessarily to you know, publicize me. But yeah, And I've also written a series of film reviews for Christian Toto at Hollywood and Toto.
Okay.
Haven't done that in a couple of years, but I wrote maybe 5 or 10 of them. You know, Kale, I sent you the link the other day.
Yeah, it was a great one.
Did you read it?
I did actually. Yeah. Have to wade through all the ads on that website, but yeah, I read it.
Oh my gosh, I know. But you know what?
It's
I like Christian. I like what he does, and I had been thinking about something in American Psycho. I was like, oh yeah, I remember when I had this epiphany about it. I was like, wait a minute, that movie's not about what I thought it was about.
So good. I love that idea. Love that idea.
So, and it was probably because I'd seen an interview with what's his name, Easton Ellis.
Yeah, Brett Easton Ellis.
And I was like, I was like, this guy. Yeah, I was like, this guy's fantastic. People do not understand him.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, thank you, Mac.
No problem.
Really appreciate. Can't wait till it comes out. And then we'll publicize the heck out of it with our followers.
Of course, absolutely.
And hopefully, I'll catch up to Kale's 5,000 by then. I was like, damn it!
Hey, look at that.
I posted that yesterday on X. I was like, wait a minute, help me out here. Kale's got more than I do, and I taught him everything he knows.
It's true, and I retweeted it for you, Greg. I retweeted it. So.
I appreciate that, man. You know I'm joking, Kale.
I know, of course, it's great. I love it.
Any last just thinking about the people listening, anything like last message you'd like, and off the tip of your tongue, that you'd like to just tell the listeners listening today?
Yes, you matter. What you do with yourself and your body matters, and don't let anybody seduce you into the allure of nihilism.
And I would simply add to that, Mac, that sometimes in order to change big things, you just have to change small things.
All right, gentlemen. Well, hey, thanks everyone for listening, and keep fighting the good fight. Thank you.
Be well. God bless.